Okay, Boker Tov, Shavua Tov. Today's daf is daf Zion in קידושין. As we went for a foreshadowing for Elazar ben Reuma and Yosef ben Chaim Michal. The last line on Vav and Beis. Omer Rabba. 10 man of Ploni Bakara Shani Lach Mukudeshes. Midin Arev. What are we talking about here? We've learned that a man is supposed to take his wife. He has to give her something, either kesef shtar or bia. Well, can it work in other ways too when he gives her something which isn't actual money or shava kesef? He gives her something else. For example, 10 manal ploni. Let's say she says, "Do me a favor, give this guy $100. Give Yankel." Let's say Reuben is marrying Leah. But Leah says to Reuben, "Give Shimon $100. If you give Shimon $100, I'll be married to you." Now, what about saying Harat Mukadeshes Li? Yes, he turns around. Rashi says, when she gives him the Ukshanasnu lo, when she gave him the money, Amr Le, Hiskachili, be married to me. With this thing, I'm doing you a favor now. I'm giving this money to Yankel or Shimon, and I want you to be guests with that. It works. Now, how does it work? Did she get anything? Well, yes. Midin Orev, just like a guarantor. Orev Afagav, did the guarantor get anything? You have a malva and a lova, a lender and a debtor. The malva gave money to the lova, and the guarantor gave. What did he gain? The lova, yes, got some money to be able to use the money. He needs the money for his business or to buy a car or something, right? The guarantor got nothing out of it, yet he obligates himself to pay. The same thing. He obligates himself. The woman also, even though she didn't get anything. Did she get it? That's the opposite. She gave the money to him. She said to Reuben, "Give this money to Yankel, and I'll be married to you with that," even though she didn't get anything. She obligates herself and she gives it. But obviously she's getting something. She's getting pleasure out of it, right? She didn't physically she doesn't physically receive anything. She doesn't receive a star, she doesn't receive kesef or a ring or anything like that. But she got some pleasure, like we saw in yesterday's daf, that if you're makadesh with a milva, right? The Gemara said, let's say Reuben had lent her $100. And he says, "You know what? I lent you the money last week, keep it. That's your marriage money. That's your ring." That doesn't work. Why? Because that money's gone. As soon as he gives her the money, she's not supposed to keep giving that. If you lend somebody $100, he doesn't do that same $100. He borrowed that money to use it. The money milva load son to spend. She's going to give him back. She has an obligation. The debtor has an obligation to pay back another $100. But that money's gone. But if he's Makadisher with that money, there's nothing here now. But if he's Makadisher, let's say he extends the loan. He says, "I lent you the money for a week. I'll tell you what, keep it for a month." And he's giving her some pleasure. That's good, we saw. So when you're giving pleasure to somebody, so here also, this woman is not receiving anything. She just the opposite. She gave him $100 to give to Yankel. Give him $100, and I'll be Makush to you. You're doing me a favor. You're giving me some pleasure by doing that. So how does it work? She's not getting anything. Well, an Arav is not getting anything out of it physically, right? He's not getting any pleasure, yet he obligates himself. In other words, what is he doing? Why is the guarantor doing it? Because he's getting some pleasure. Oh, you're lending my son the money, I'll guarantee it. Because you're doing me a favor, you're getting something. That's what you're getting in return. That's the first case. Let's say the other way around. Hey, Lachmana. Let's say Reuben says to Leah, "Take this money, Viskachi Laploni, and I want you to be Makudish to Shimon. I'm giving you the money, and I want you to be married with this money to Shimon." Now she's receiving money, right? She's getting a ring, but she's not Makudish to him to Shimon. And what did Shimon do? He didn't give anything. That also works. Now it's not where he was a shliach. Shimon sent Reuben as a shliach. Obviously, he's a shliach. That works. He didn't say that. It says with that, and it was Reuben's money. Reuben said, "Take this money and be mekadesh to Shimon." She's mukadesh midin eviknani, like an eviknani. Eviknani, how is an eviknani free? If somebody pays on behalf of him, right? He's an eved. He's supposed to be owned by the Jew forever. And if somebody goes and pays the Jew, here's $1,000 and free the eved, he's freed. Did the eviknani pay anything? No. Eviknani also didn't pay anything. He's not missing anything. He didn't spend any money. He acquires himself. Hi Gavranami. Shimon. He says, "Listen, Reuben said to Leah, here's $100 and he'll be married to Shimon." So Shimon didn't pay anything. Even though he's not missing anything, he didn't spend any money. Nothing came out of his wallet. It works. So in all these cases, in this case, she got $100. She's actually receiving money. She's receiving something to be married to Shimon, even though Shimon didn't spend the money. In the first case, she's mekudeshes to Ruvain, even though she's the one who gave him the money. Right? Give this money to Yankel or to Shimon, whatever, and I'll be mekudesh to you. Why? Because it works like an Arab. Even though she didn't receive anything, she still obligates herself the same way. Obviously, she's getting her no. That's what she's receiving, but she didn't receive any money, so to speak. Like a guarantor didn't receive any money, only pleasure. The third case, 10 manol b'karashani lo, give money. She says to, let's say Shimon says to her, Shimon says to, no, I'm sorry, rather she says to Shimon, give money to Reuben and I'll be married to him. I'll be betrothed to him. Give money to him. Now, how does that work? She didn't receive anything and Reuben didn't spend anything, right? She says to Shimon, give money to Reuben. Leah says to Shimon, give money to Reuben, I'll be mekudesh to him. It works from both aspects, both from the Arav and the Eviknani. Arav, even didn't receive anything, he obligates himself. She didn't receive, she spent the money. Both in the first and the third cases here, she's the one who gave the money to Shimon, right? And she said, in the first case, she said, give the money to Shimon and I'll be mekudesh to you with that. Here she says, give the money to Shimon and I'll be mekudesh to him with this. So she's giving him the money. Obviously, in all these cases, the husband, though, has to say, Hiskachili, you're mekudesh to me with that. Even though in the second case, he didn't assign the person who gave the money as a shliach. He just said, the Shimon said to Leah, or whatever the names are, Shimon said to Leah, here, take this money and be mekudesh to Ruvain. Not as a shliach. He just said it on his own. So then it works at Evikani. Why is like an Evikani? Even though Reuben didn't give any money, he still acquires himself, right? Can still acquire it. So also, in this last case, she said to Shimon, give money to Reuven, and I'll be mekudesh to him. Now you need both aspects, both the Orev and the Orev. She's mishaber herself, she obligates herself, even though she didn't receive anything. Herself, she gives herself over. So in the case of the Orev, the one who acquires something spends something. He spends something and he's getting something in return. I'm selling you the field or an Orev, whatever, and I'm getting something in return. Hi, Gavra Kakonila. Over here, in this case, Reuben acquires him. He didn't spend anything. The answer is Eviknani. Look at Eviknani. The local chasman, he's not missing. He didn't spend any money. Somebody else paid the money for him to get free. But Nafshen acquires himself in the same way over here, where Reuben didn't spend any money. Shimon spent the money, right? And or in this case, Leah spent the money. Leah gave the money to Shimon and said, give the money to Reuben and I'll be acquired to him that way. So here the same way, he didn't spend any money, right? The guy who's marrying her, the Reuben didn't spend any money. So that's what we say here. Again, in the case, 10 even though she's mishaber herself, even though she didn't receive anything. So you say, what do you mean? An Arav, at least the person who is acquiring something spends some money, right? He spend when he's getting something in return. Hi, Gavra there's Eviknani money. Eviknani didn't spend any money and acquires himself. They're the slave master who's makna the eved to his freedom. At least he received money in return. But here the woman is giving herself over. She didn't get anything. Yeah, so even though he didn't receive anything, and therefore works from both of them. So in all these cases, the husband eventually has to say, "Iskachili, be married to me with that." And you understand that he's acquiring her. But what is he acquiring her? He's acquiring her with the hana that somebody fulfilled the obligation. But in this case, you say she got some hana. Or in the second case, she actually got the money. But there he said, "I'm giving you the money, and I want you to be kaddish to the other guy." That works because of an Eviknani, even though the other guy didn't spend any money, he's acquiring something, gets his freedom. In this case, he gets the woman. That's how these cases work. So in all these cases, there's Hana being transferred. Yeah.
You said earlier that a woman can't give the money to the man.
Correct. She can't give the money and say, I will be Makudish to you. But over here, she gave him the money. And she says, I will be Makudish to you. I will be Makudish to you. And he said to her, then you will be Makudish to me with this pleasure. I'm giving you pleasure by accepting this money. I'm giving you pleasure. She gives him the money, and she says, and I will be Makudish to you. It works like enough. She obligates herself. The question was, she didn't receive anything. Yes, she got pleasure. And he said, I want you to be Makudish to me with this pleasure that I'm giving you here now. Before we said that she can't give him the money and say, I will be Makudish to you with this money. No, he has to say, you're Makudish to me. He has to take her. That's the key. Like we saw yesterday, or we'll see another case like that too. What happens if he just says, she says like this, listen, take this money and I will be Makudish to you. That's exactly this case that we're talking about, right? So before we said, the first case that we said before, brother, was give this money to Reuven. Telling Shimon, give the money to Reuven and I'll be Makudish to you. So even though she obligates herself, even though she didn't receive anything, right? I'll be Makudish to you with you doing me this favor. What happens if she says, befavor, take this money, I'll be Makudish to you. I'm a Marzut, Mishmaid Rav Papa, Mukadesh, it works. I'm a Rav Ashi, Marzut, how can I work? I can't have in a Chosim Shisham Achrais. In all these cases, she says, I'll be Makudish to you, but he has to turn around and say, yes, you be Makudish to me with this. So does that work? Does that work? I mean, he said, I'm Makudish to you with this, you're getting some pleasure over here. So Gemara says, but how does that work? She, a woman, is like karka. We have the pasuk says it's nachaltam some when it comes to Ebed Kanani, that a person is compared to karka. Karka is considered the chasam sheish lemachrayis. It's got some obligation to it. You can mortgage something based on that. And we have a klal that if I sell you my land, and let's say I have a car or some metalflin on the land, you can acquire. If I so desire, you can acquire. When you acquire the land, you can acquire the metalflin with the tool. We'll see that later on. But the other way around, it doesn't work. So Rav Ashi said to Moshe, how should that work? And can't have a chasam sheish lemachrayis, like the person over here, the woman, the bride, nickname she's acquired in the chasam sheish lemachrayis, acquired with the money. In other words, she's giving him money, and along with the money, she's giving him herself. Obviously, he has to turn around and say, be Makudish to me with the pleasure that I'm giving you of receiving your money. But the question is, how does that work? She's acquiring with the money, she's giving herself. You can acquire metalflin together with karka, but not the other way around. It's not because I'm not saying that I'm giving you agav the money. I'm giving you the money, and with the money I'll go along with it. No. Here we're talking about where he was let's say a rabbi with the pleasure that he gives her by accepting her gift. Right? A woman goes over to a rabbi and says, please accept this $100 I'd like to give you for your family or your yeshiva or whatever. And she is so pleased by him accepting the money, she's getting that pleasure. Right? Gomer Maknaf, she gives herself over. That's what you have to say probably in the first cases also. Give money to Shimon, or Shimon, you give money to Reuben, give this money to Reuben, and I'll be Makudish to you. Why Makudish? What is she receiving? Yes, he has to say, all right, Makudeshiously with this pleasure that I'm giving you. But she's receiving this pleasure. Otherwise, what is she getting from him? She still has to give, at the end of the day, the husband has to give something to the wife. Yes, the mechanics work that how could I be Makudish to you if you're giving the money to him? Okay, the answer is Azarav. She obligates herself even though she's not receiving any money, but she's getting pleasure. And the same thing in the other cases. All right, the Gemara now says, and the same thing applies not only by a woman, but let's say it's a monetary matter. Let's say Reuben is selling Shimon a field to Shimon, and Rashi gives us the cases. Right, even where we are. These three cases of Rav, קידושין midin Orav and midin Eviknani came in Yimamora. Machalo Sada. Reuben sold Shimon a field. V'amarlo Taina Kesef Ploni the Sada Mechurlach. Okay, give this money to somebody. Give Shimon. Give this money to Yankel, and my field will be sold to you. Again, you're giving me pleasure by fulfilling my wishes. Well, kind of midin Orav, right? He acquires it Orav even though he didn't give any money, right? Even though he obligates himself, He's not receiving any money. The owner, Reuben, didn't receive any money, and he obligates himself. He sells the field. Second case, Halach money, take this money. He gives him the money, and your field. Shimon gives the money to Reuben. He says, "Give this money, take this money, and your field should be sold to the other guy." How can the other guy acquire it? He didn't pay any money, like an evet. The other guy could acquire it as an evet. Evet, even though he didn't pay anything, can receive it. Same thing here. So here, Reuben said to Shimon, "Take this money," right? Or Shimon said to Reuben, rather. Reuben is the owner of the field. Take this money for the field, but I'm not going to get it myself. I want the field to be acquired by Yankel. That works also as an Evet Kanani. Yankel didn't pay any money; he still gets to keep it. Or 10 manal Ploni, give the money to Ploni v'tiknelo sadai po, and he should acquire my field thereby. Konabidin shneim. The other guy acquires it even though he didn't spend any money as like an Evet, and the tiknelo sadai and the Arev, right, who didn't receive anything over here in this case, 10 manal Ploni v'tiknelo sadai, right? Give the money to Ploni, and he should get my field. He obligates himself to give this field, even though he didn't receive anything. He's the one giving the money. That's like an aura. So these cases work in both cases. In other words, it works. The deal can work. Why do you have to tell me both when it comes to Mammon and when it comes to Kiddushin? She'd rather receive anything. I wouldn't rather be married than be single. Right? It's better to have two bodies together than be alone. So you might say, okay, the woman, even though she didn't receive anything physically, like in the case of she gave the money and said, "Give this money to Yankel and I'll be married to you." Maybe she's willing to get married even for hardly any money at all, just for some pleasure. So maybe over there you'd say that it works. Alpha Mamona a Malobi wouldn't say that by money. By money, maybe he wouldn't. It's not a good deal unless the guy selling the field gets the money, right? In the first case, where we said that give the money to the uncle, and why should I give my field if I didn't get any money? You may say this doesn't apply. The answer is it could work too. Money matters. You can be mochel. I can be mochel. You can owe me money and I mochel it. But by you don't say a mochel. You have to actually fulfill the psuk of mafkika chishisha. So you can therefore tell me in both cases that these things work. But obviously you're giving something. He's getting some pleasure from it. Otherwise, he's getting nothing. He's getting nothing. If she's getting nothing in the case of קידושין, how could she be married? But in all cases, he has to say, the husband has to say, "You're Mekudesh to me. Iskacheli, you're Mekudesh to me with this thing that I received." So if she said, "Give money to your uncle, and I'll be Mekudesh to you," so Reuben, who's marrying her, will turn around and say, "Yes, be Mekudesh to me with this pleasure that I'm fulfilling your wishes." Or in the second case, where he said to her, "Take this money and be Mekudesh to Ploni." So there she received the money, but Ploni didn't pay any money, right? So how is he Mekudesh? The answer is like an Evet Kanani. He can acquire something even though he didn't pay anything. In the last case of 10 manal of Ploni v'kadash lo, give the money. She says to let's say to Reuben, give this money to have the same cases. She tells Shimon, give this money to Reuben and I'll be Mekudesh to him. So again, she didn't receive anything. That's like an aura. And Reuben didn't pay anything. That's like an evet, and it still works. But she's getting some pleasure. Okay, we're at the 2 dots now, right? The first of the wide lines on the page. Amarabba. His kachili lachatzi mukudeshes. Let's say he says, I want you to marry half of me. This is a strange thing. I want you to marry half of me. It works. Chatzich mukudeshes. Let's say he says though, and he gives her money, he gives her a ring, whatever. He says, but I only want you to be married to half of me, then it works. But if he says, I'm marrying half of you, that doesn't work. Any mukudeshes. But what's the difference? With his wife, he say half of you should be married to me. Then in mukudeshes that doesn't work. Why? Because isha marchmanav lo chatzi. The pasuk says kikach isha. You got to marry a man has to marry a woman, a whole person. So if he says, I'm marrying half of you, that doesn't work. Why? Because the Torah says, Isha v'lo chatzi Isha. So how does it work when he says, I want you to marry half of me? It's actually half of me. A woman can't marry two people, right? A woman can only marry to one person. A man can marry two women or more. This is what he means. This is what he means to say by that. When he says, I want you to marry half of me, he meant to say that marry half of me because I might be taking another wife for my other half. That's a way, it's an expression. He meant to say marry partial of me because I'm going to have other wives. But if I'm marrying half of you, that doesn't work because she can't have multiple husbands at the same time. So I understand. Why do you say that if I say I'm marrying half of you, it doesn't work? Right? This is the sugya of hispashtus. It's a big sugya in Shas. If you go to yeshiva, they'll spend a few weeks on this daf. It's called hitpashtut. Why don't you say, listen, I marry half of you, and that's your mekudeshes, you're sanctified to me, and then the קידושין spreads, the holiness in her spreads out through the whole person. So why do you say if he marries half of her, it doesn't work? No, he marries half of her, but when he marries half of her, he marries the whole thing, similar to an animal. Let the קידושין spread out to all of her body. Did we not learn Let's say a man wants to make an animal holy. He takes a shore, kesef ways, and he wants to sanctify to the base of the bring it as a carbon. And he says the leg of this animal should be an olah. What's the halacha? Take ula, the whole thing becomes an olah. Because yes, he only made the leg, but the whole thing, the kedusha spreads out. Even if there's a machlokas about that, if the animal entirely becomes kadosh or not, but that's if you're makdish like a leg, something which is not a vital organ. If you're makdish, let's say the heart or the liver, something which is the lungs, something which is a vital organ, everybody agrees. The whole thing comes because he's pashtus. So why don't you do the same thing by Isha? Why do you say if I'm marrying half of you, it doesn't work? What do you mean? If as soon as I marry half of you, the whole body becomes kadosh too, becomes betrothed to him. And so how can you compare an animal to a woman? There it's an animal. Whatever is the animal, if the animal has no control over it, if you're makdish one part of the animal, so the whole thing becomes holy. That's what your intention was. Over here, you have what's called, like Rashi says, das acheres hamakeves. You have somebody else. There's another daya over here. The woman doesn't agree to that. The woman says, "You're marrying half of me. I'm marrying half of you." That's a joke. I don't really want to be married. I don't want half of me to be married to you. And therefore, it doesn't work by a woman. It might work by an animal, but even with a vital organ, but according to everybody, but it doesn't work with a woman. She doesn't want to. It's up to her to decide. You can't marry her forcefully against her will. You can't.
Unless she accepts it.
Unless she accepts it, right? But over here, presumably, she didn't accept it. In other words, even if she didn't say I accept it or accept it, the assumption is it doesn't work automatically. She has to agree. She has to think about it. There's another day. The zoo lonis ratza lachatzia. She only agreed to half, and therefore you can't say it spreads out. Marry half of me, okay? I'll marry half of me. I'll marry to you. Fine. Doesn't automatically work. By an animal works because he has no das. But over here, she only accepts. He doesn't know what's going on. But here, she only accepted for half. She didn't accept for the whole thing, and therefore you have das acheres, and it doesn't work. Hello, dummy. This is only comparable to Damar B'Yochanan. If you want to compare it to an animal, look at this case. Reuben and Shimon, two different people, owned an animal together. Reuben was makdish his half. Okay, his makdish his half. Can you bring it as a carbon out? No, only half is Scottish, half is not. Because of Alakha, then he bought Shimon's half afterwards. Vikdisha was makdish it. Kedusha and a crave. It's Kaddish now, but you can't bring it as a carbon. Why can you bring it as a carbon? Because you don't say I was makdish half, the other half automatically, because the other guy wasn't makdish his half. Shimon wasn't makdish his half. Later on, Reuben bought the half, the other half for Shimon was makdish it. Then the whole animal was Kaddish, but you still can't bring it as a carbon. The more points out why. It's Kedusha, it's Kaddish and a crave, but also Tmura. If you made a Tmura, let's say you took another animal and said that animal should be like this, it's also like that. With Tamur Kiyotzav on the Tamur is like that too, that it's Kaddish and it can't be brought as a carbon. What you have to do is sell it and bring another proper animal with with the money. Shman al says you see three things from this, by the way, but it's important to see the idea of it's pashtus. The key is that by an animal you could say it's pashtus, but by a person where there's a das acheres, you can't say it's pashtus or melech because she only agreed to have. What do you? Yeah.
Why not
You're not supposed to, but if you did, it's the same thing.
just go to the whole document?
That's what you should do. You're just saying, You're never supposed to make it tzmura. Pasuk says lo yomir. You should never make an animal. You should never say this animal should be kadosh in the place of this animal. You should never do that. But if you do, it has the same kedusha. In certain cases, like let's say a chatas. A chatas has to be brought for a sin. So let's say I have this animal and I say, I don't like this. I'm going to make another one. I want B to take the place of A. So B is like A, but B now has to be killed because it's a chatas which can't be brought as a carbon. So you can bring a chatas. A is being brought as for the sin. B is like it's one of the 5 chatas that you have to let die. If it's a shlomim, then you can bring it as a carbon. Not supposed to, but if you did, or as an ola, if they did an ola as a donation, you could bring it. You could bring it. But in this case, you can't bring it. Why? Because the kedusha was messed up. Shmamina says the Gemara at the end of the daf, in the top of the page. Shmamina bal chaim nitzim. Number one, there's a shiloh whether an animal, which was sanctified, and then something happened to it, it's rejected. You can't bring it anymore. Maybe that's only after it was dead, after it was slaughtered. But while it was alive, maybe not. No, here you see it's nitzah even though it was alive. The animal's still alive, and you say you can't bring it as a carbon. Number two, it didn't have to be ra'ui after you shechted it and then it became rejected. Here it was rejected from the beginning. As soon as you made it holy, halfway, right, half the animal, you couldn't bring it as a carbon. It was rejected right at that point. Again, even though the animal was never kadosh really to brought as a carbon, because it was never wholly sanctified in a state which you could bring as a carbon. Since only half of it was sanctified at the beginning, it's only sanctified in the sense that you could sell it for its value. You can never actually bring it on the mizbeach. So these three questions are shilas. Is a Baal Chai, can a Baal Chai be rejected or not? And rejection only works after it was once roy. But if it was rejected from the beginning, you could say later on it could become good if that would be the case. It wouldn't work over here, but it would work in other cases. Even though it didn't have really Kedushas Aguf at all, you could still be nitli. So you see those things as a side thing. But as far as our Gemara is concerned, the key is that if you marry a half a woman, that doesn't work, right? Because a woman can only be married in her entirety, because she can only be married to one person at a time. If I say, I want you to marry half of me, what he's really saying is I might take some other women also as wives. Boy, Rava asks a bunch of other questions. Rava was sure about the first three cases that he brought down, of give money to him and I'll be Mekudesh to you, right? Or give money to him and I'll be Mekudesh to him. So Rava was pretty sure about those cases, and he was sure about the case of his iskachli lechatzi, we marry half of you, that works. I marry half of you, that doesn't work. What about these cases? Boy, Rava, here he's not so sure. I'm marrying half of you for half a pruta, and the other half of you for a pruta. We're going like this whole that you need a pruta. That's the minimal amount, not a dinar, like the Shammai said. But he says, I'm marrying half of you for a pruta, and then I'm marrying the other half of you for a pruta. Mao. Once he said a half a pruta for half of you, so he divided it already. It doesn't work. Because you can't marry half of you for a pruta, and that's it. Rashi says, I married half of you. I married half of you doesn't work. When he says afterwards, I marry half of you, that also doesn't work. So like he divided it, he said, that's it, and therefore it shouldn't work. As Rabbi just said, that marrying half of you doesn't work. Oh, Dilma, maybe he's counting it out. Of course, I mean to say I'm marrying you for a pruta. I'm marrying half of you for half a pruta, and the other half for the other half of pruta. But it's like one long phrase, and therefore it should work, because he's marrying all of her for a pruta. Intim saloma monavel. Maybe you'll say, okay, that's really, he's marrying all of her for a whole pruta, and it should work. What happens if he says chatzik pruta, chatzik pruta? What happens if he says half of you for a pruta and half of you for a pruta? He didn't say chatzich b'chatzi pruta b'chatzich b'chatzi pruta. You can say he's adding it all up. Here he says chatzich b'pruta. Well, the pruta is all it takes to get married. So maybe there he really meant to say, I'm marrying half of you for a pruta, period. That's more of a division. If you say it's a half a pruta, he knows you can't marry for half a pruta. So he meant to say, okay, half a pruta on this side and the other half of you for the other pruta for a total of a pruta. But if he says half of you for a whole pruta, maybe he meant really to divide her into two and say, I'm marrying half of you for a pruta. Oh, and I'll also marry the other half of you for a pruta. Now, even though a pruta, upruta, since a whole pruta and a whole pruta paschal milsa, he divided it in the middle. He's saying, I'm marrying half of you for a pruta, which doesn't work. As long as it's the same day, as long as he's marrying or doing both halves of the same day, he's like a continuous count. What he's really saying is, I'm marrying you for 2 prutas. Half of you for 1 pruta, half of you for the other pruta, and it should work. If you say that everything on the same day is one continuous thing, and therefore it should work, because he's effectively telling you, I'm marrying all of you for 2 prutas. What he says, I'm marrying half of you for a pruta today, and half of you for a pruta tomorrow. Since he said the next day, Pascha, there he's dividing it, and therefore it doesn't work, because he said, I'm marrying half of you for a pruta. That doesn't work. When he says, I'm marrying half of you for pruta tomorrow, that doesn't work. קידושין מסכת midnight. I'm starting קידושין for right now. I'm going to have one long קידושין. I'm going to start today with half a pruta, and I'm going to finish tomorrow with the other half a pruta. Half of you today for a pruta, and half of you tomorrow for a pruta. Total of 2 prutas. But I'm going to marry. It's going to be a long engagement, an engagement over 2 days, right? Ad l'macher. Or what happens if he says shnei chatzich for pruta? What happens if he says both halves together for a pruta mao? He said it in one time, half you. You can't marry her in halves at all. Halves don't work. Halves don't work whether it's the same day, whether it's on 2 different daes, whether it's all together. You can't marry her half. You have to marry a whole woman. So you can't say I'm marrying both halves of you for a pruta. Maybe that doesn't work. All these questions stand. So that's not a way to get married. Boy, Rava. Now we say you have to get married for pruta. What happens if a man has 2 sons and they're both gadol? A man cannot marry a woman unless he's a gadol. He's bar mitzvah. A yavam, remember, as long as he can have bia, as long as he's capable of bia, even if he's, let's say, 9, 10 years old and he can have bia, he can perform yibum, because yibum was done even without das, as long as it's performed, as long as the bia is performed. But for a regular boy to marry a woman, girl, he has to be a bar mitzvah. So let's say a man has 2 boys, 20-year-old and an 18-year-old, and they each give their father a half a pruta, right? Or the father gives it to them and assigns it to them, and he acts as a shliach, and he goes to another man and he says, I want your 2 daughters for my 2 boys, my 20-year-old to your 10-year-old, my 18-year-old to your 8-year-old. I'm marrying off my 2 sons to your 2 daughters. I'm acting as their shliach, their gedolim, and they sent me to marry your 2 daughters, right? Okay, so we're not mixing them up. The 20-year-old will go to the 10-year-old, and the 18-year-old to the 8-year-old. And the father of the girls, he's marrying off his 2 young girls, right? That should work. But the problem is not in the קידושין. The problem is the money. He's marrying them both off for 1 pruta. So that's good. Boy, Rabbi Shtei Nosach l'shnei banai bepruta, for 1 pruta. Now, Mom, what do you look at it? Do you look at the giver and the recipient, the donor and the recipient? The donor here, the father of the boys, gave a pruta, and the recipient, the father of the girls, received a pruta. There's a pruta there. You look at them, the chassan and kala, there's not enough of a pruta for each one, right? If they're both getting married, then neither one has a whole pruta. How do you look at it? Do you look at the person who's giving the money and the recipient, in this case the 2 fathers, or do you look at the chassans, the chassanim and the kalot? And there you don't have a pruta for each one. Take it, that question stands. Boy, Rav Papa. Now we get to Rav Papa's kasha. Whatever he says, I want your daughter and your cow for a pruta. I'm giving your daughter and your cow for a pruta. What do you mean, Mao? Is he giving the daughter for half a pruta and the para, the cow, for half a pruta? And it's no good, because you need a whole pruta for the girl. Odilma, maybe meant to say your daughter I'm giving for the pruta. I'm giving a pruta for both. The para, we'll make some deal later on. I just want to pull that. I mean, you're throwing the para in or whatever. I'll give you some. I bet the kinyan is made with Mashiach. I'll do the Mashiach that way, but your daughter is for the pruta, and therefore it would be a good marriage. Take all these questions, they stand, and the woman presumably would need a get, right? Because you don't know if it's good or not. But Rav Ashi has a similar question, but it was a different rabbi. It wasn't Rav Papa's Rav Ashi. Your daughter and your karka and your land for a pruta. Mao. Is he saying your daughter for half a pruta and the karka for half a pruta? In which case it wouldn't work for the marriage. Oh, Dilma, your daughter, I'm going to give you the pruta for your daughter, and your karka, I'm going to make a chazaka. That's one of the ways you can acquire karka with kesef shtar chazaka. Chazaka here being showing ownership, putting a lock on the door, putting a gate up, whatever. Take these questions all stand. Ahu gavra, daktish b'shiroi. A man was makadosh a woman with some silk. Okay, that's shava kesef, like a ring, Rab Amar Lo Tzricha Shuma, it doesn't need an assessment. Do you need to assess how much is worth? Now, the silk obviously is worth more than a pruta, but does it have to be assessed so she should know how much value of silk she's getting or not? Rabbi says that an assessment is not necessary. It needs an assessment. So if he says, I'm marrying you with the silk, whatever it is, I'm not giving you a price on it. I'm just saying I'm giving you with the silk. Everybody says, it doesn't need an assessment. Whatever it's worth, she knows it's worth more than a pruta, right? When the guy gives her a ring at a wedding today, do we know how much the wedding band costs? We don't know. They just said, does it worth a pruta? Yeah, it's worth a pruta. It might be worth $100, might be worth $1,000. We don't know. So as long as it's worth a pruta, you're not telling her that it's worth. You're not giving her and saying, you're not lying to her and saying it's worth $1 million and it's only worth $1. You're not saying that. So you're just saying, I'm giving it to you, whatever it's worth. It's worth more than a pruta. So everybody agrees you don't need a shuma according to this pshat. If he tells it's worth 50, below shabachamshin, it's not worth 50. Below shabach, it's not worth that much. It's a mekatoves. Where's the machlokas that Rabbi says it does not need an assessment and Rabbi Yosef says it does? He says it's worth 50, and it is worth 50. So if it's worth 50, what's the problem? Rabbi says Lo Tzricha Shum doesn't need assessment. The Shabbat he says it's worth 50. It is worth 50. That's no problem. So you don't need an assessment. It's a Kiddushin. But the other side, no, Tzricha Shum, it's not a Kiddushin until it's assessed. Why? Keeping this a little bit keep Shum. Since she's presumably not in the market and she doesn't know what it's really worth. Well, some chadaita, she doesn't rely on it. And he says it's worth 50. She doesn't really know that it's worth 50. She might be saying to herself, maybe it's only worth 10, and I don't want to get married for 10. I want 50. So therefore, Joseph says it's not a marriage until it's assessed. He didn't say, if he says on the condition that it's presumably it's not, it needs a shem kivla shem tchila and in kadeshes. It's not. She's not. If you have to do it Rashi says at the beginning, you have to assess it. Otherwise, it's not a marriage until it's assessed. That would be an example. If the guy says under the chuppah, I'm giving you this ring that's worth $1,000, and she says, that's $1,000. It's not $1,000. It's maybe worth $2. You know, it looks like a cheap ring. So maybe she wouldn't be married. That's what Yosef means. Another way to learn is, even if he just says whatever the silk is worth, there's also machlokas there, right? Rabbi says, he says whatever it's worth. What's Rabbi Yosef or no? Shava kesef or kesef. The value of kesef, right? The valuation of kesef, something that's worth kesef, is like kesef. My kesef to kids, just like kesef has a definite value. You know what it's worth. You know it's $1. You know it's a shekel. Af shava kesef namidikais. It's got to be something which you could tell what it's worth. Rashi shava kesef kesef. I mean קידושין kesef ksiv. The shava kesef is Rabbi kesef. I mean Yoshev Rabbi shava kesef. So it's got to be like kesef, just like kesef is a fixed amount. If I'm giving you an item, it also has to be a fixed amount. That's Rabbi Yosef's opinion. Rav Yosef says, where do I get this from? Because Rav Yosef says, even if he didn't say it's worth 50, it's worth 50. So in the first opinion, so it's worth 50, you better check, make sure it's worth 50. If he didn't say it's worth 50, or if he said it's worth 50, it's not 50, of course it's not a קידושין. But according to the first opinion of the Gemara, if he didn't say how much it's worth, just I'm giving you some silk. So it works anyway, because you know it's worth at least a shavaputa. Right? So then, but according to this opinion, the second, according to the Ikanamri, Rabbi Yosef says, even if he didn't say what it's worth, but it's worth more than a shavar puta, and you don't know how much it's worth, he says, no, it also doesn't work unless there's assessment. Just like money, you know how much it's worth, it has to have the definite value. Shavar kesef also has to. Rabbi Yosef says on the top line on Ches, how do I know this idea that you have to know what it's worth, otherwise it's no good. You have to have that otherwise it's not, you're not mocking it. It's got to be something where you can tell what its value is. The Tanya, because if a slave sells himself, so he can redeem himself based on the number of years. If you sell yourself not sold by Bezin for stealing, and he couldn't pay the loan like Mishpatim, but later on in Vayikra, when it talks about a man sells himself, he can sell himself for 5 years, 10 years, whatever he wants, and then he can redeem himself if he gets money. It says Mikesef Nelson, Mikesef Vinik, he can acquire himself with. He's Mikesef Miknesser from the money for which he was sold. That's how he can redeem himself. In other words, you figure out, let's say he sold himself for $100 for 10 years, so it's $10 a year. So if he worked 4 years and he has 6 years left, he's got to pay $60 to redeem himself from the money of that he was bought with. So Mikesef Vinikna, he's only acquired with money, not it's not acquired with produce or utensils. So Gemara says, if you can't be sold for that stuff at all. Yoshev Gulasam Rahman al Rabba Shavak Kesef Kesef. Well, pasuk is over there in the same parsha. Yoshev Gulasam, he will return his redemption. Now that word is extra. Could have just said Lapian Gulasa. According to the money, that should be his geula. Whatever he was sold for, you extrapolate. You divide it up and figure out. You prorate whatever his number of years left, and you pay according to that. How many days or weeks or years are left? You pay according to that. The word Yashav is extra to teach me the Shabbat Kekesef is Kekesef. That it doesn't have to be actual cash. It could be the value of cash. The value of cash is also something that has the same value. If it's not worth anything, okay, why talk about it? Okay, if it's less than Shabbat Kesef, if it's less than Shabbat, it doesn't count for anything. Less than a Shabbat, you can acquire something. Elolav, the ispa, in other words, that called kesef if it's less than a Shabbat. You could give yourself over for some hana, or you could agree to something less than a Shabbat that you agree, but stam kesef is a Shabbat. So, kesef nami, elolav, the ispa Shabbat. We're talking about with the Shabbat. Keeping low kaitse, low. In other words, why does the Gemara over there say the Bryce says kesef? No, so kesef is not nikum tefukah. Why not? Tefukah b'kelim is Shabbat kesef, and we learn off in that parsha Shabbat kesef. You should Shabbat kesef is worth. You can't say it's worth less than a Shabbat pruta. Then even kesef would be no good. So why would this tefukah and kelim? Why can't you redeem yourself or sell the evet with tefukah and kelim? Elamai, because it doesn't have a fixed price. That must be the only reason why it doesn't work. Even look low. So that's Rabbi Yosef's proof. Says Rabba will answer. Idach no hachikamer. The Torah's kesef unikna. It doesn't mean to say because it doesn't mean you can't be acquired with produce or with utensils. It means to say that the Torah's kesef will only be sold as for money, and the Torah's tefuvah and it can't be acquired as tefuvah. What do you mean by new chalipin? Chalipin is a way of exchanging. A slave can be sold or redeemed for money or the value of money, but he means when he says tefuvah, it can't be sold, can't be exchanged, so to speak. It can't be exchanged like bartered for produce or utensils. That's what he means to say. It doesn't mean to say you can't be sold. It can be sold, it can be redeemed for Shavak Kesef. It just means you can't sue it as Chalipin. Rav Nachman said Chalipin can only be something like a hard item, like shoes or a belt or something that's at pants, but not Peiros. They can't make Chalipin anyway. So why does it say what's the idea of the tefua of Caleb? It doesn't work anyway for tefua. It can't be worked for food. Michael Lemaimer. So it can't be Elolam this less by Shavah Pruta. Doesn't have Shavah Pruta. Uda Kamret, if it's no Shavah Pruta, in other words, when you say Kesef Nasav and not Tefua Kalim, which don't have a Shavah Pruta, Uda Kamret, Ma'ir Tefua Kalim. You said, so why Tefua Kalim? I feel Kesef Nami. Let me boy Kamret. It means that not for sure. Let me buy Kesef. Certainly, you can't be sold for Kesef. It is the E is by Shavah Pruta. E low. If it's not Shavah Pruta, it doesn't work. It can't be sold. Can't be redeemed. I will Tefua Kalim. Eva Midah Makaber Nasu Gomer Mak Nafshe. When it comes to produce or utensils, even if it's not with the Shavah Pruta, that to me it might be worth something. I'm going to get some pleasure immediately. I'm going to eat something there. I'm going to use the kli for something. I'm going to get some immediate pleasure. A person might say, I'll sell myself for that anyway. And therefore the slave could be sold for something. For Tefillah Kim, it's less than Shabbat. Mashma, no, less than Shabbat, it doesn't work. So that's one answer. So Rav and Rav Yosef basically disagreed on the shot of Mekesef Ignaso. Rav Yosef said Tefillah doesn't work. Why not? Because it doesn't have a fixed amount. Rav said no, it's not because it has a fixed amount. It just means to say it can't be exchanged, or it can't. If it's not worth the Shavah Pruta, it's no good, even though you might get some enough from it. So Rav Yosef then said, okay, another proof I have that if you get married with Shavah Kesef, it can only work if it's assessed, if you know exactly what it's worth. The time we learn Egel Sel Lepida B'ni. You know how much you have to spend, how much you have to give a coin to redeem your son, 30 days old, your firstborn, right? Firstborn Petarechem, has to be 5 shekels, right? 5 golden coins. Let's say he says, I'm giving you this this calf. I don't have any cash, take my calf, or talis, this garment. Lo Klum. Then it doesn't mean anything. Let's say this calf is worth 5 selah. It's worth 5 shekels. All right, it's worth 5 shekels. Or but our party works. Now, why? High pidyon hechidami. If it's not worth the 5 shekels, called community, is he believed at all? Certainly, it's got to be worth 5 shekels. Elulav, afagav the shavi, even though it's worth 5 shekels, it's still no good unless it was assessed. Keeping low kaitzi, since it's not a fixed amount, low. In other words, therefore he says, if he says Egel and it's assessed for that, then it works. Then no public. But if he gave the Egel and it wasn't worth 5 shekels, and he didn't say 5 shekels, and we don't know what it's worth, why does it work? If it's not worth 5 shekels, of course it doesn't work. If in the first case where you say the pidyon is I'm giving you this calf, I'm giving my garment for the pidyon of my son, it's not worth 5 shekels, of course it's no good. It's got to be worth at least 5 shekels. Is he empowered? How can you have to redeem it for 5 shekels? And if it's not worth that, then it's of course no good. It's worth that amount. But since it's not fixed, we don't know what it's worth until it's assessed. It doesn't work. That's Rav Yosef's second proof that if it's not cash and it's clothing or something else or an animal, whatever it is, if it doesn't have a definite value to it, it doesn't work. It doesn't work in the case of Pidyon. It doesn't work in the case of Isha. It's low. It's really not worth any. It's not really worth the 5 shekels. That's why it doesn't work. That's how Rabbi will answer. We're going to Kabul Kohen. The Kohen accepted. He says, for me, it's worth 5 shekels. It's not really worth 5 shekels on the market, but I'll accept it as if it's 5 shekels. The other Rav Kana was a important rabbi. Shakel Sudim Ibei Pidyon Ben. He took a pidyon. He took a hat or a cover on his head for a pidyon Ben. He was a Kohen and he accepted it. For me, it's worth 5 sel. It's worth 5 to me, even though it's not worth that on the market. Rav Ashi Lorman, Rav Kana the Gav Rabba. Only for Rav Kana who was a chashuv rabbi, and he always had to cover his head. He needs a cover on his head, he needs a hat. I will pull Yama for everybody else who don't cover their heads normally. Low. It's not worth that. It's for him. He bought a hat like that, say, from the mother of Rabba of Kubi, Shavi Eser Betleser. It was worth 10, he paid 13. In other words, for a person who needs it, it's worth more. So the point over here is this. Rabbi Yosef says, this is a proof from here, that why doesn't it work? It must be worth 5 shekels, but since it wasn't fixed, it's not a good pidyon until it's assessed. The same thing with the woman accepting קידושין until it's assessed. Even though it's worth the bride of money, it's worth more than a puta, it's worth whatever it's worth. It's worth a lot of money, but if you don't know exactly what it's worth, she doesn't accept the קידושין. Rabba says no, it's not necessary. If it's worth more than that and you didn't fix it, if he says it's worth 50 and it's not worth 50, of course it's no good, right? But if he says it's worth 50, and indeed it is worth 50, it doesn't have to be assessed. It turns out it's worth 50, it's okay. And if he just says he didn't even say what it's worth, then certainly it's okay. You don't need it to be assessed. So Rav Yosef says it needs an assessment. Rava says it doesn't need an assessment. And in the case with the pidyon, where he said, I'm giving you my animal or my talus, and over there it says he didn't say it's worth 5 sela. The Tana says it's not worth that, and it lo omer klum. Why is it not worth anything over there? There it's speaking where it's really not worth the 5 shekels. That's why he didn't. It only works, if the guy, to him, it's worth 5 shekels. But if it's not really 5, at the beginning of the price where it says, even though in that case, the reason it doesn't work is because it's not worth 5 shekels. But in a case where a coin accepted it despite that, okay, he could say to him it's worth 5 shekels, but it's not worth really 5 shekels. But if it would be worth 5 shekels, even if he didn't say it's worth 5 shekels, it works even without assessment according to Rav. According to Yosef, we need an assessment. All right, we'll pick up for the 2 dots tomorrow.
The question is,
Yeah.
They don't ask the question, how come it's not in the Mishnah?
Marrying to me without with Tovas Hana? Yeah. Well, that's a different question. Is Tovas Hana value or not?
That's what
Yeah.
I'm saying.
Yeah.
So that's
It goes
my
according.
assumption is that so it's considered ilu kesef.
Right. That's like the general question of the Gemara is Tovas Hana kesef or is it not kesef?
Yeah.
That's a general question. Over here, in the cases that Rava pointed out at the beginning, so I think what you're referring to, he definitely gave a pleasure. It wasn't Tobason, right? It wasn't like there's a possibility of thing. There's definitely gave a pleasure, right? Except right then, right? No,
I'm giving you money, but
yeah,
you're such an important person that I get enough.
Right.
So that it's ilu kesef.